Hello and welcome to the show. For this week's Canyon Rally, I'm going to be driving some bangers / derby cars. We start with the Barstow that, despite having seen considerably better days, the headlights do still work, which I wasn't quite expecting them to move on the car. Now, engine-wise, it's still got a half-decently powerful V8. It is got an automatic gearbox, nothing I can do about that, and suspension is a little bit on the dead side. I'm not quite sure what's broken in it, but it's very, very broken. You can see the car bouncing around. I think the dampers have probably gone completely, because once it starts bouncing, there is kind of very little that you can do about it. It kind of wallows and tips its way through the corners. It's not very nice to drive. And I may have ended up carrying a bit too much speed when I realised I got the brakes, locked everything up. That didn't really help matters, and off we go, tumbling down the mountain. Yes, it is rather difficult to keep control of the car when you're trying to carry speed and the whole thing is bucking around wildly. There is now some rather large amount of fire going on at the front. Amazingly, after all of that crash, while the engine is completely and utterly knackered, the steering kind of still works. The chassis is completely bent and everything is, horrendously buckled and on fire. I've got no drive, but I can point it down a hill and, have some form of control. But the wheels aren't very circular even at the front anymore. But some form of control is going on in that bent up, horrible mess. So I made it past the faster chicanes. We're going up to 70 miles an hour before we jump off the bridge, which is pretty good going for a vehicle like this, although trying to get it slowed down again, I wasn't quite prepared for it to be carrying as much speed as it was down there. Got on the brakes way too late, and then it starts bouncing around. The bumps in that area are nasty at the best of times, let alone when you have really rather dodgy sort of suspension going on. Now, trying to put the power down out of the pond hairpin, we don't really have very much in the way of front end grip. I thought we were clear, I thought we were fine around the corner. We just understeered straight off of the map. Not my finest driving, I will admit. I was just expecting it to turn more. I was expecting to get a lot more turning. Again, you see the car bucking its way into that turn, turning a little bit better, but still managed to get myself into trouble, clipping the barrier. I thought I might get away with just clipping the barrier with the rear of the car and have it straightened up, but it's still not the grip to get away with that sort of speed. And once more, we're on fire with the front of the car all rather twisted up. Now, this jump wasn't actually too bad on the Barstow, although you don't want to get the wheels caught on the sand. Just can't get it slowed down in time. Too much speed into the next corner. A very easy mistake to make. Loads of cars, so many cars in fact, have gone off in a very similar manner down there, and this bounces around a lot more than most vehicles under braking anyway, let alone in that part. So this time I was determined not to understeer off the course. Instead, what I did is run across a little bit of the jagged rocks on the inside, and well, that tore up the front wheel. Now, we have seen that happen before with a couple of cars. Normally you have to be a lot more aggressive at running the inside line there if you're going to snap something. This, I must have just hit it that little bit wrong. And that went very easily. So, not a good idea. I suspect already pretty beaten up car running across what is quite extreme little bit of terrain down there. Put those two together, and that is why you get a snapped wheel incredibly easy. We don't have too much airtime to worry at the crest of turn 1. When we did get on to our clean run with the car, it's got some decent speed about it, but it's certainly not the fastest car we've had, so we've not got massively out of control over turn 1, and we can get it slowed down for the second corner. These bits got to be very careful if you're trying to carry speed, which of course you want to be doing through these chicanes. The car is going to bobble and bounce around, and if it's too much speed, you might just bounce your way off of the course. It can be flat out over the jump. It takes a little bit of a heavy landing, however the suspension's already dead to begin with. Doesn't really matter, it doesn't affect anything else. Surprisingly, the radiator was staying in one piece, which, considering the rest of this car, is not bad going whatsoever. As we now come around the pond hairpin, really make sure to have the car slowed down in time. Actually, on this particular run, I think it might have just gripped a little bit on the dirt, or might have just clipped the tiniest of curves. It kind of suddenly twisted a bit more to complete the turn, which, you know, makes life a bit easier for me. We're struggling a little bit with brake lockups as the car bounces around. It's a funny old thing to try and get slowed down, as we can now accelerate away down the fastest part on the course. We have seen some cars, like the Capri and the Formula car, up to about 160 miles an hour down here. We're not going to be doing that with the Barstow. It's just shy of 100. But you've got to be very, very careful into this section. There are nasty bumps that catch out a lot of normal cars, let alone the amplified bumpiness when you have a car like this one, so did have to be slow on the way in. Once you're through the worst of it, though, you can go back to picking up speed, and it's going to be 86 miles an hour across the line for the Barstow. Yeah, it is an interesting one to drive. It just doesn't stop really bouncing around. Does, though, you know, mechanically speaking, survive the course pretty well. Even some heavy landings across the bridge jump, we don't sort of bend the steering up so much. You can see that the only damage done at the front of the car, we've got a shattered windscreen and slightly damaged bumper. So, yeah, I thought it would be a lot worse, actually, considering the wrecked state of the suspension. I thought that would do an awful lot worse. Up next, we have got the Grand Marshal, but this is a Derby variant of the Grand Marshal. It is distinctive. Distinctive is the word that I am going to go for to describe this car. Again, plenty of power in this, and actually a proper manual gearbox, which was a kind of a surprise. I wasn't sure what we were going to get from these, but yeah, it's got some decent speed going on up towards turn 1. We don't quite get massive airtime there, but still we get some, and then we try and slow it down and can't get the car stopped. I may have forgot to take ABS off with this vehicle. On the first run, it did not want to slow down into the second corner. Again, a bit of a jump across the crest there. Unfortunately, this time around, just running about 10 centimetres too wide, clipped that dastardly sign, and that tore off our rear wheel. It's such a horrible sight. It's so easy to find yourself out a little bit wide, especially the angle I'm tending to take the crest at turn 1, and you just brush along it and it will capture your car and it will tear it all apart. You see, I can get away with running that inside a little bit more with the Grand Marshal, although as I tried to get on the power, we got some oversteer at an inopportune moment as we came across the dirt, and I couldn't save it all in time, trying to get away with carrying the speed there, and not quite doing it. It's a pretty spectacular tumble with exhaust pipes flailing around all over the place, bending up the car. However, the way that it's twisted, the way that it kind of kept landing on the boot and doing damage at the back of the vehicle, meant that it actually still works after that tumble. The radiator's gone, and it does get beached a little bit, with the chassis as bent as it is. It's perhaps not too surprising. But yeah, the car is still perfectly okay. I say perfectly okay. It has seen better days, however, it is drivable. I mean, we're seeing some of the big SUVs survive tumbles off the mountain like that, but for a more normal road car, that's a pretty impressive survival feat. We then also get a lot of understeer on the way out of the tunnel hairpin. I wasn't quite ready for the lack of turning. But we sort of got it turned in initially and thought, yeah, that's great, we can now boot it out the other side, and it just didn't quite work out. Perhaps, like, on a whole, it wasn't a particularly understeery car. Perhaps it was just me being way too brave with it, but I was not expecting that from the car whatsoever, and it's a very almost silly crash, that one. However, this really wasn't too bad to drive down here, bearing in mind the bouncy suspension mess that had just gone. This was quite positively excellent in the handling department. Yeah, brakes were pretty solid. As again, we take that tight to land. This time, I'm not getting bounced around quite as much on the landing. We don't end up out towards the signpost. Get the car under control for the turn in to that second corner. It's not got the greatest of suspensions, as you can see through there. It is still, you know, it's not a race car. This is not supposed to be. It is still obviously not the best suited vehicle down here. However, the wobbles are a lot more minor than they were in the Barstow. It is a bit of a heavy hit on the landing of the bridge jump, but again, nothing gets snapped up. We don't, you know, break suspension more than it currently is. We don't lose steering or bend wheels on that point. I say we don't bend wheels. It ever so slightly went out of alignment, and I think it was from the bridge jump, but I'm not 100% sure. It could be elsewhere on the course. It does ever so slightly pull to one side. You don't really notice it a huge amount because I'm having to do all of the little corrections, but yeah, it's just an ever so slight bit broken. But yeah, on the whole, considering the state that I've had some cars take that jump in and that sort of speed, it does really, really rather well. Now we are back to going flat out, and we will crack the 100-mile-an-hour mark in the Grand Marshal, up to 107 miles an hour before you need to get on the brakes. It can be a lot more aggressive across the bumps down here. You can throw the car in, a little bit of understeer through the mid-corner, as can often happen with cars. This is a fast, very, very narrow section. Not much margin for error. It's 94 miles an hour across the line for the Grand Marshal, almost losing the back end as we try to bring it all under control. And yeah, there we go. You can see the bonnet ever so slightly pinged up, that I assume is from the landing of the bridge jump. Surprisingly pretty nice car to drive, actually. I was expecting a lot worse. I was expecting an awful lot worse from this vehicle, but that was simply not the case. I did try to have a look if you could see a wheel that was bent. I think it might ever so slightly be out of alignment, but yeah, a pretty distinctive and surprisingly drivable car when it came to going down this is a rather demanding canyon rally course. And finally, we have got the Delta 88. Now, I drove a rather high-powered version of this down the course a fair while ago. In fact, this is sort of an ex-police car turned into a banger variant, because why on earth not? It looked entertainingly silly to try and get control. Unfortunately, I couldn't get the police lights on the top to work. I could get the little side lights at the front to go, but I couldn't get the main sort of police siren. Either way, this thing is certainly not slow. On the way up towards turn 1, it was carrying a bit more speed than I was expecting. Managed to keep it under control initially, but then the back end lets go, and then we have a little bounce as well. We have to have a little bounce. It can't be outdone completely by everything else that has gone so far. And this will become a rather large theme with the Delta. There is zero rear end grip. It is worse than perhaps some of the drift cars that I have taken down here. There is just absolutely nothing in terms of rear end grip. And the problem is there's also a fair bit of power, so it's both on power and off power oversteer that you get going on. Now, it's not going to be the most spectacular of crashes with this car, because most of the time it was just me going to either put power down or carrying a little bit too much speed into a corner, and the back end would just let go, trying to get it slowed down for turn 2, lose the back end. Again, locking the rear brakes won't help either. And that was one of the more spectacular tumbles with this car, the spin actually causing it to go in the ditch slightly and have a rather large roll. Across the bumps there, actually, I'm surprised it didn't do more damage, bouncing sort of sideways through the air, landing very awkwardly for the Delta, although clipping the rock on the left-hand side, or kind of the dirt on the left-hand side even, was enough to upset the car, and it just couldn't save it in time. The back end was so very, very keen on spinning round. It was, yeah, definitely a bugger. Definitely a bugger to try and get down this course quickly. You're never quite sure when the back end might let go. Again, a big bounce across that area is none too helpful. I just about managed to gather it all back up through the first part, but it is too big a change of direction through the next part, and we're once more pointing backwards. Yeah, of all the vehicles that I've driven down here, this is the one that I've had the most problem with huge oversteer. I think this was the only crash not caused by massive oversteer. I just land slightly awkwardly, end up with a wheel or two on the grass, just drags the car sideways, snapping the front wheel and getting it a bit wedged up here. I think that is about the only crash that wasn't really caused by oversteer. As I did say, there was plenty of speed in this car, and as I was trying to get a quick time, it was also easy to outbrake yourself. That's the second crash, actually, sorry, caused with not really through the oversteer, just pushing it a little too hard, missing the braking point there. We go for a pretty sizable tumble down into the water. So yeah, this took a little while to get the hang of. There really wasn't a particular good trick, if you like, to keeping this car under control. It was just be incredibly careful in terms of both throttle input, and when it came to the steering, don't try and change direction too fast. You've got to do the minimum steering input required to get the car around the corner, because if you chuck it in with too much speed, it's just going to go round. Even at these relatively low speeds, you'll see me have to constantly try to correct the vehicle to make sure that we don't have the big oversteer moments. Yeah, it might look spectacular, but it's not particularly good in terms of getting a quick run. Again, another car that's pretty solid across that bridge jump. No real issues. We're going fast enough so we can land it neatly. We're not going so fast, though, that we overshoot the landing zone massively. Actually, quite nice with all of these cars. You were flat out up towards the bridge jump, and they would land it. They would land it neatly. Again, the car's wanting to get that little bit of oversteer. There is perhaps less sort of bobbling around with this vehicle than we had with the other two, as far as suspension-wise goes, but this had way more issues in terms of oversteer, so you kind of didn't really notice that that wasn't an issue, because yeah, we had bigger problems, almost get into trouble on the run out of the tunnel hairpin there. And often with cars like this on beam, if they do start getting sideways, it is incredibly difficult to catch. If they're not built for doing that, it is incredibly difficult to get them all back under control. Now we come through this fast section. Again, the back end is wiggling around more than I would like. However, it is just about pointing in the right direction. As we come up towards the final corner, kind of across the line, it is a little bit too much of a turn for the Delta, and we lose the back end, smack it into a rock, and well, that made a mess of the front of the car. We made it all the way down the course before we had an oversteering crash, and to be fair, that was the first time I'd taken that corner with the vehicle, so yeah, it doesn't matter. Once it's past the barrier, once it's across the line, doesn't matter if the car then has a massive accident. The car was still working. Unfortunately, the way that the front had all been smashed in, it meant that we couldn't really get any drive with one wheel spinning in the air and a terrible diff. That actually probably wouldn't have helped matters either. Now that I think about it, that could have made some of the matters worse. Yeah. On to the times. It is the Derby Grand Marshal that would go quickest, to 146.2. A fairly solid time for a Derby car. A couple of seconds down on the Cadillac DTS in the Rally Cover. You know, it's exactly 2 seconds down on that Rally Cover. It's not bad going at all, beating the Ford Crown Vic, the Burnside race car. We find the Delta 88 banger not that far down in 42nd place, 147.8, same time as the ETK 6000 series, the big racing truck. The Delta would have been very fast had it not had such horrendous oversteer. It actually had quite a lot of power, decent enough brakes, but yeah, the horrendous oversteer meant you have to be so very careful with it. We do have to go a little bit further down to find our Barstow. It is in 47th place, 151.7. Considering it had a terrible gearbox, nowhere near as much power as the other two cars, and utterly broken suspension, to go quicker than the Van Hammer is, you know, it's not too bad at all, actually. It is down on the 200BX drift car and the Roma. I thought it might be a lot further down, though, so to be in the mix there with such a broken car is, yeah, perhaps a little bit surprising. However, that is going to be it for this video, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.